Now see it, person to person, a weekly document for television, as told by the faces and voices of people in the news.
So it's January 20th, 2000, 20 double aught, and here we are out here in the dark, awaiting the arrival of Norm Stamper in what may prove to be one of his very, very, very final appearances of any kind as a public figure. Certainly meeting with reporters, which he's supposedly about to do at the Seattle Times in the Society for Professional Journalists, Society of Professional Journalists presentation on the WTO and whether the media did all it could have done in the presumed goodness of its heart. So my guess is Stamper will be overly obvious. He'll probably roll up in his big black Explorer, park in the visitor's lot, not think I had to do anything too sneaky, so got a good chance of getting him here. Got here a half hour early, scoped the joint out, went inside. He ain't in there, but to all appearances, he's got to go through the front door. Good evening, Mr. Stamper. How are you this evening? So I was wondering if I could draw on your many years of experience as a police professional to give me an opinion on ballistics. That opinion being, how is it that a decedent could shoot himself through the roof of the mouth with one of these, a 20-gauge shotgun shell, and not suffer an exit wound? How is that possible, sir? Do you have an answer for that? Look at the size of it. 7/8 of an ounce of hot steel and lead, traveling 1,200 feet per second. And the roof of his mouth was supposed to have stopped the blast from this shotgun shell in the Kurt Cobain case. Do you honestly believe that? Do you honestly expect the public to believe that fairy tale, Mr. Stamper? Do you know anything about wound ballistics? Do you own a textbook on the case? On the subject, sir? Look at the size of it, Norm. 20-gauge shotgun shell. The roof of your mouth would stop a blast. 7/8 of an ounce of hot steel and lead hitting the roof of your mouth.
Sorry?
Yes.
The police chief, I'm sorry.
Kari, who is
She's on the panel too. She's MSNBC.
There was another decedent in the year of 1994. His name was Antonio Terry. He was one of your detectives. He died of a wound from one of these. He bled to death from this minuscule weapon, this cartridge. Do you honestly believe that he received the proper care at Harborview Hospital?
What is this about? What is this
It's
about?
about the Kurt Cobain homicide. Who are you?
Well, who are you? We're not
Cobain
talking about Kurt Cobain tonight.
Fired one of these through the roof of his mouth, and all of the shots stayed inside his skull, sir.
Follow me.
Poppycock, poppycock.
Chief Stamper, don't you
No
think
one
it's a little bit
believes that.
strange that there was a lot about a week or two of terrorist hysteria before the New Year's celebrations? You said that you were afraid of terrorism. You're afraid of a threat of terrorism before New Year's, and that's why you had to shut down the Seattle Center. But what about the terrorists that during the WTO, the real terrorists with the nuclear or with the biological and chemical weapons were actually the police? They were the only real terrorists during the WTO. So why did you say you were afraid of outside terrorists when it was really the police that were the terrorists?
Thanks a lot. This, sir, is a textbook on ballistics. This is the classic wound scenario. This is what the victim of an intraoral shotgun blast suffers, Mr. Stamper.
Dave, nice to see you.
Do it.
Good. How are you doing?
Not accredited here, I don't think.
Nice to see you.
Look at it, sir. This is the science in the case. This is the result of an intraoral shotgun blast. to the roof of the mouth, Mr. Stamper. Do you feel an obligation to study police sciences, sir? Does that make sense to you?
I think it might be appropriate if you left him alone a little bit, sir.
Well, I think it might be appropriate if you mind your own business, honey. I'm not listening.
They're not going to stop me.
Are you the police?
Right now.
No, I'm not. I'm just standing here. I'm a guest.
Now, in January of 1999, your excuse for not discussing the case was out of respect for Mr. Cobain's family, as well as the investigative
The only
unit.
terrorists in town were the police. Remember that. There was no chemical involved.
Now, Mr. Cobain has no family in your jurisdiction. Kurt Cobain had no family in the city of Seattle, except his wife who lived here temporarily. As far as your investigative unit, that investigative unit, Mr. Stamper, as you know, is rather famously discredited now, having been led by Sergeant Don Cameron.
Pat Davis. Hi, how are you?
It's usually this big.
So I understand. I hear you. So your reasons for not discussing the case, Mr. Stamper, don't make sense, and they don't in any way match your police manual's description of the non-release of information. Don't touch me. This is the death certificate, sir. Look at the death certificate. I challenge you. Contact perforating shotgun wound. Contact perforating shotgun wound. Do you know what that means? That means that the shot went in his mouth and it went out the back of his head. But you very well know that the King County Medical Examiner no longer describes the wound scenario that way. He now says
Thank you so
that
much.
Kurt Cobain shot himself with one of these and suffered no exit wound whatsoever. Not a drop of blood was spilled at the scene of the crime. And you are the police chief,
Okay, cool, thanks.
and you've been said up until this year, you have said that you were completely satisfied with the death investigation into the Kurt Cobain homicide. An impossible wound scenario, sir.
Your time's up.
And you've had absolutely no coherent comment on this case whatsoever in nearly 6 years. And now you slink off to retirement, having said nothing about the case, and leaving it to others to clean up. No exit wound. No exit wound. Compare this to the shot that killed Detective Terry.
Please.
Do you see the difference,
You said
sir?
you understood now.
Do you see the difference?
Let's do it.
Let's
Please.
just relax, pal.
Yeah, well, you relax and go back there and relax.
The death certificate is wrong. Have you ever done it? How can you be satisfied with a death investigation where the death certificate is explicitly wrong?
Please. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Marcus Donner. I'm the president of the Western Washington chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists. I'd like to welcome everybody tonight to the program. We have a good crowd. SPJ is the nation's largest and most broad-based journalism organization that is dedicated to encouraging the free practice of journalism, stimulating high standards of ethical behavior, and to promote the free flow of information vital to a well-informed citizenry. SPJ works to protect the First Amendment's guarantees of freedom of speech and the press, and at a local level to produce programs like this. For more information on how to become a member of SPJ, there's information out in the lobby. It's also contest time. Information about our programs, our contests, and membership information can be found on our website at www.spjwash.org.
Thank you, Marcus, and thanks to everyone for coming tonight. I just want to briefly introduce the members of the panel. We have 10 people up here tonight, and then let Cliff Rao, the moderator, take it away. First of all, we're very happy to have Police Chief Norm Stanford here tonight. Norm has been police chief in Seattle since February of 1994. Prior to that, he spent 28 years with the San Diego Police Department, rose to the ranks and served as deputy chief in several agency offices. Anyway, thank you, Norm, for coming tonight. Next to him is Megan Black. She's the, let me get her. running the WTO coverage, has been chief of the East Side Bureau, and been with the Channel 7 news team since September 1994, in a variety of positions. Next to her is Dave Logie. He's Executive News Director at King TV, overseeing more than 40 hours of news programming each week on King and sister station Kong. Has been in that position since September of 1998.
Had stopped. People were no longer so fearful at that point, in my perspective of the coverage. We had the agriculture rally, we had the sit-ins at the jail, and we had time to sit and listen to people's issues. As far as the long-lasting impact and the thought that I have, I was born and raised here, went to school here, only for a short time as I had moved around in my career have I left Seattle, and Seattle changed because of WTO. We lost a lot of our innocence. Good or bad, however you think about it, we moved to the next level. And growing pains hurt, and we're feeling the repercussions of that. You saw what happened on New Year's, with the canceling of the New Year's celebration. You're seeing the city is going to be handling things differently now. And in some aspects, that's kind of sad, having been born and raised here. And I think the whole event changed us. But it was also pretty historical, and it was a pretty significant and important event, and I feel like I was privileged to be involved in it.
My job during the WTO was to work with the newsroom to coordinate and plan coverage throughout the day. I think that in a lot of ways WTO was a coming of age for newspapers in this city, because PI was live throughout the day and the night. We had in-depth coverage from our reporters on the streets. We had breaking news. We were there when the gas was flying, when the bullets were flying. And I think that both the Times and the PI updated their sites throughout the day. Newspapers in Seattle no longer were a one-time-a-day event. And I think it's very significant in journalism in this millennium, in this new century. Online is part of our everyday lives. We found ourselves serving an audience around the world as well as in the city. There are a lot of office workers who sit there and check the websites throughout the day from their desks. They turn to the PI and other online sites during WTO to find out where the disruptions were, where the streets were open, what was going on. And that was a key role of me and my staff throughout WTO week.
Your perspective, sir.
Need to begin by saying that police have a responsibility in events like the World Trade Organization to be neutral and non-aligned and to provide protection and service to all parties to the event, which meant obviously a responsibility for delegate protection, for dignitary protection, for ensuring in cooperation with the Secret Service for a safe visit of our President as well as the Secretary of State and other distinguished individuals. And an equally important responsibility to ensure for the rights of those demonstrating against the World Trade Organization to have their voices heard and to raise the issues that they did on social and economic justice, on labor issues, on the environment, and human rights generally. When we learned that the WTO was coming to Seattle, we began immediately a planning and preparation process that lasted on a full-time basis for a half a dozen people, including my operations assistant chief, for that entire period up through the event itself. An NPR commentator, you've probably already heard this remark, made the statement that WTO, as has been suggested here, might stand for the call letters of a Midwest radio station. That very few people really knew and understood the implications, the intensity, the nature of the feelings either in support or in opposition to either free trade or fair trade. But once again, the responsibility for the police is to provide safety and protection to the fullest extent possible. We knew that there would be really the inevitability of massive demonstrations, the probability of civil disobedience and the consequent need for mass arrests, and the very distinct possibility of destruction and violence. And we knew this from Geneva, and we knew it from APEC in Vancouver. And for that reason, we spent many, many months and budgeted $6 million for training, for equipment, for overtime for this very special event in Seattle. I think in looking at media coverage, there's one aspect of the coverage that my police officers and I feel very strongly was inadequate. And that is that in addition to the long hours and the denial of opportunities for rest and for sleep and for food in some cases, our police officers also took rocks and bottles and chunks of concrete and bricks and urine fired from high-powered squirt guns and dumpsters lit afire and 55-gallon cans rolled down on our police officers. And they had to contend with Molotov cocktails, which actually were never used, but which in fact could have provoked the use of lethal force legally, defensively by police officers. So we were facing extremely delicate situations throughout the week, and especially on Tuesday and Wednesday. The media called this, among other things, the battle in Seattle.
So did your police guild.
Unmitigated disaster and a debacle.
They sold T-shirts, Battle in Seattle.
Hey,
Your police
please,
guild.
show all the speakers courtesy, please.
Come on, he's just lying and lying.
Yeah,
So
so
those were terms that were used to describe the event during that week. I would elect to use the term riot. We had
Police
a
riot.
riot in Seattle. And my own sense is that many of us in policing, in journalism, and among demonstrators and protesters and other observers, that we have really lost a connection with our own history. The civil rights, the anti-war demonstrations, the campus unrest of the mid-'60s through the early '70s produced numerous instances in which cars were overturned and torched, buildings set afire, bombs detonated, large stretches of business districts looted, shots fired, and people killed. What we had in Seattle was a riot, and there were no deaths, and there were a relatively few number of injuries. And to my way of thinking, that from a law enforcement point of view, that's a really important story that hasn't been told adequately.
It's sad but true, everybody screamed about the Monica Lewinsky business when it was going on, and yet the numbers really showed that everybody clicked on the Monica, they just crashed our servers because there were so many people looking at Monica Lewinsky's story. But there's another thing which is, it can be a little bit self-perpetuating. I think it's a really interesting thing, because if you start thinking in those terms, particularly as a journalist, like where do people go, and you sink to the lowest common denominator, because you're like, oh, well, that must be what they like. I'm not suggesting that you're saying this, but I mean, it is very tempting to say, well, the numbers say this. But what happens is that you tend to then start, pushing in that direction and catering to it. When you put things on the cover of a site, you find that people in large numbers go to that place. And so just a little warning that you could end up with kind of a self-perpetuating cycle where, you have the most kind of tawdry thing on the front cover because you think it's going to sell, and because it's on the cover, it does sell. And you're in the uncomfortable position of trying to play catch-up.
Well, let me make one point, if I may just jump in here, about police brutality. Everybody knows that police brutality is the big, sexy story, and, everyone wanted to get a piece of it in terms of showing violent footage and all the rest of it, but I haven't seen any coverage, and correct me if I'm wrong, on the subject of how the police manual, which is extremely thick and laden with references on how the Seattle Police Department has to identify itself in a variety of ways, was basically thrown in the gutter before the state of emergency or martial law or whatever it is that you want to call it was declared. And no one has written or reported on how someone has to be held to account for this. And what Mr. Stamper, Norm Stamper, the chief of police, told me on tape on December 2nd was, these uniforms are actually what is called a hard uniform, and they were placed on order many months ago, and we just received them. They are brand new to us. I asked, did you personally approve them? No, but I personally support them. Did the mayor approve them? No, I don't believe the mayor approved them at all. And then I asked him about why there weren't serial numbers anywhere to be seen. For instance, this is the police manual And the police manual, if you look at the helmet, shows what appears to be a 4-digit number several inches high on the helmet. And when I asked Stamper about this, he said, lying his ass off, by the way, that they have a very large number, which is a serial number, on their helmets. And then he gestured and said they're right across the front of the helmet. Now, this is a bald face. Like, I've seen hundreds of these hard uniforms, and I saw out of hundreds.
I'm going to ask.
Pardon me?
You're not.
You got the chief of police who's going to be running out of town and never is going to be seen again in a few weeks, and you got a room full of reporters, and none of you people are asking him the hard questions.
It sounds to me like you are.
Okay, okay, I'll shut up. Let's get Norm Stamper to explain the process of putting those secret police uniforms on the street.
This has nothing to do with media coverage of WTO.
The media's never covered the uniform story. It's perfectly obvious.
I see other reporters with their hands up in the back. We did question that. We did report on that. The issue was not concluded yet. I don't know.
We're going to wait for the Compton report.
I don't know what the rest of our coverage is going to be, but I do know that it has been questioned. We had lengthy discussions on our talk shows with guests.
But talk radio is talk radio. It's ephemera. Let's see some front page stories on the police running wild, unidentified in the streets. That's the story. And by the way, Mr. Stamper didn't offer one word. What is he even here for? He didn't offer one word on the uniforms tonight. Are you all protecting the city from civil liabilities? Is that what you all do here?
I have read that the Direct Action Network plans to have a demonstration up in Redmond for Microsoft.
All the way to New Year's as a justification for massive police presence, when in fact, you know, I know, we all know that the only terrorists in this city that were sporting any biological and or chemical weapons during this entire time were the arms of the U.S. police under the command of their capitalist employers. So why the reference to us as violent and bringing upon warfare?
Megan?
I had a long talk with a couple anarchists following what I experienced on the streets of Seattle. I was standing at the Starbucks window when they came around the corner, 30 of them dressed in black, faces covered, refusing to talk to me, and took a crowbar 1.5 feet from my head and slammed it against a window and broke it. Now, you may not call that violent, but let me tell you, from my perspective, that was violent.
It's vandalism.
I don't care.
It's corporate vandalism.
It was a threat to my being right there. It was a threat to the people. Yes, I was. It was a threat to the people in that building. You cannot tell me that is not violence. I'm sorry.
It's not. You placed yourself in harm's way. That's
you
the
know,
job,
I was
Dave.
standing there. That's it. So I don't, that's where you get that.
You see a speeding truck coming, get out of the
There were
way.
provocateurs.
And to go back one more point, we did talk with the Ruckus Society, we talked with them, we met with those people, we went up to Arlington and we did stories. Everyone promised there would be no violence. There would be sit-ins.
There was no violence
there would
done
be,
by the protesters.
Excuse me, you didn't
There was
listen to what I just
vandalism
said.
done by the
And
protesters.
so, when you
Vandalism.
turn around and
Vandalism is
strike,
violence.
No, it is not.
when you strike
Not
a
when it's
crowbar
aimed at a
1.5
corporate
feet from my
sponsor
head,
of the WTO.
I am using the word violence because that is what, as a journalist, I experienced.
What about the word
That's
terrorism?
not-
My question
that's
was
not the people in the
terrorism.
streets
Biological,
or
biological,
what a
chemical terrorism,
school
that was my
district would
question.
call.
That was only the
That's
police.
bull. That's total bull.
Yeah, who said it?
Who said it? Where
Again,
did it come from?
this
We
this
heard it
comes
all
back
the
to the
time leading
question
up to the
before
WTO,
I asked
threats
this
of
gentleman here.
biological and or
If you
chemical
need to give
warfare.
us a specific, because
We heard it on the
I
news.
was there every
And
day
that was their excuse for counting
endless hours
millions.
and never used the
Terrorists.
term terrorist.
Terrorists were the police, not anybody else.
The only reference to that I recall in any of the media were
Law enforcement and the public have a deal in this country. And the deal basically is that we provide with very limited resources and in partnership with the citizens, public safety. And the exchange basically is the citizens agree to responsible citizenship. And we saw responsible citizenship on the part of most of the protesters, and very irresponsible citizenship on the part of the people with the crowbars and the TV, the newspaper stands being thrown through windows and the like. And I think that, once again, just sort of complicates the issues, is having a whole lot going on at the same time
Just gas everybody, that's the idea, right?
The sanctions killing the children of Iraq don't look like vandalism or violence, but they're every bit as deadly.
Other responses up here? Back there.
And maybe we don't always do as good a job as we can in presenting information, important information that people don't want to hear.
On that
What
note,
about the media blackout? Why weren't we told there's tanks in the streets of Portland and that there were uprisings in New York and San Francisco? Where were you?
International solidarity.
The international press talked about it.
Please.
The domestic press did
Carrie.
not talk about that. I want to know why.
thank
Why
all of
did you
you.
ignore that? You call yourself reporters, you're supposed to report reality? That's a gross abuse of the public trust. And you're talking about how boring the WTO is.
Thank you all for coming.
This thing is true.
How you doing? How's things going?
Okay, you here to impede my progress here?
Impede your what?
Just doing my job. What's your job?
My job's to get home. I came to work at 7 o'clock this morning.
Oh, you're not blocking for Stamper, huh?
You as a person.
Yeah, it truly is. Excuse me,
Yeah, I
please.
probably will ask you.
It,
Quitting, but I haven't entirely.
it's a function that has to be performed, a mission that needs to be achieved. It's so complicated by
It'd be great when people start doing their job and honoring the public trust instead of abusing it, like we see so often.
Stepping down, Chief, you didn't do any good. You didn't do any good at all. If anything, you should have had some balls and stayed with it. Because we're not going away.
So, Mr. Stamper, does it occur to you that my questions about the Kurt Cobain homicide are something that you're going to answer at some time in the future? You know, I've been asking you these questions for 5.5 years, and basically all I've gotten is this nada nada attitude. Don't you feel that you have a responsibility to answer questions in a homicide case in which there is an impossible wound scenario?
Chief, on a different subject, is there anything in the debrief that's been
Have you
going
ever
on
fired
that
a shotgun, Mr.
that you
Stamper?
could share with us?
You know the kick of a shotgun, a 20 gauge or a 12 gauge shotgun?
Richard, can I get one question?
It's not important, Jim.
Is there anything you can share with us about in the debrief that we've learned that we can apply?
Well, the debrief process, the whole debriefing process, of course, is still underway, and it will be for some time. But I think the one statement that Assistant Chief Ed Joyner made some time ago is still operative, and that is, for a city of our size, the World Trade Organization represented possibly a huge challenge, and it's reasonable to.
What about conducting a single, legitimate, coherent homicide investigation in your department, Mr. Stamper? Do you think that that's something that your department is capable of?
Good luck in the remaining.
Thank you.
The investigative unit that you claim to be defending by not making statements. You're not making statements in the Kurt Cobain homicide case to defend an investigative unit which in fact is the subject of worldwide disrepute. This being the Sergeant Cameron squad. You know this, right? So how can you be defending the reputation of a homicide unit which doesn't have any reputation left?
So I understand.
Don Cameron resigned in
you've
shame.
done some writing.
He was the head of the Kurt Cobain investigation. He was the supervising sergeant.
We'll be in touch through Mr. Blake here.
Larry Farrar, the captain of homicide at the time,
Thank you. Appreciate
was
your
neatly
advice.
checkered out
Thanks again.
Have a good evening.
Okay.
and given a job by Governor Gary Locke, who was the King County executive and who shirked his responsibilities by not ordering an inquest into the death of Kurt Cobain. All of the top cops in your investigative unit are gone. And in a few weeks, you'll be gone too. And all you have to say is nada, nada, nada. Very responsible, Mr. Chief of Police. Right, pal, you're just gonna have to wait your turn. The license plate on that car, cop. There you have it. Thusly he slinks off. It will not be seen for a long, long time, so he hopes. You may not see him in person, but the world will see him just the same. Yep. This little tribe and its Mopic are gonna last until the end. The end, the end, the end. As long as there's digitized intelligence. Hey, headhunter! 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 Thanks for blocking for Stamper, headhunter. Jim Foreman, known as the Headhunter, for his famous story on the murdered headless prostitutes, and his chilling series of reports on how the police will be running all the way down to Portland in the search for her missing head. That's one of Jim's classics. And ever he will be known as the Headhunter, except for that incident during WTO where he said, "Shut the fuck up and get out of the way, bitch." He said something like that to some woman on Capitol Hill, allegedly. Not corroborated, but it's kind of strange that someone would make something like that up. He was trying to secure some free parking in some private property, allegedly, and made comments to the effect of, "Shut the fuck up, bitch." The Headhunter. And here we saw him blocking for Stamper. As we might expect, Jim Foreman, King 5 News. Right, and so there you have it at long last. The real we've all been dying to see for so long, right? The shuffling away of the broken man with the broken career, struggling to put together a few sentences on what he thinks about the news media and its coverage of police affairs, and what he feels were some of the aspects that were lacking in the coverage of the recent obviously riot of his police officers on the world stage. So, yes, he was being blocked by a blocker that could hardly even bring himself to do the task, right? Not something he's going to be telling his grandkids about. Not something he would even admit to us. Stamper's a physical blocker. I imagine he's a police detective, although I don't know him to look at him. Out there doing a little bit of blocking, but given that Stamper's on his way out in a few weeks, it ain't like the old days. It ain't like the old days when Norm could put a word in the ear of Officer Pam or Officer Carmen and get a lot of shoving and arm twisting done on his behalf by his media relations officers whose job, of course, involves absolutely nothing of the kind in terms of its formal description in dealing with the press. So, yeah, you can call it cruel, you can call it ever so slightly redundant, and I'd have to agree with you on both counts, but it's just the job that's got to be done, right? Certainly not going to be done by the gaggle of, folks in there looking forward to pension day and hoping they can hold on even longer than Stamper. You know, the stock market's been up and going gangbusters for a year, and those people in there working for the corporate media, they got pretty good paying jobs, because TV stations, newspapers still pull in a huge, huge dollar. And it's only got to be shared among a very few people, some of whom are unionized, some of whom are just highly paid executive types, and they're going to be loyal to the flag back there, you know, the Seattle Times and all the similar entities here in town. You know, you're working under that flag flying, and there's a fairly good chance you're going to be riding high with a near six-figure income into the, well into the next century. And of course, we're not looking for anyone to compromise their position as that goes on our behalf, or on behalf of the oft-mentioned truth that's supposed to play a part in all of these journalistic endeavors. As you saw, the Times is even so audaciously bold as to have that huge piece of kitsch in their lobby with the newsboy screaming out the truth, or that's the headline. But, you know, go down to Times Square, and one of those newspapers with the phony headline is called, it's called a $3 novelty, you know. It's called a gag headline. And dare we say, some of the only truth you'll find in the Times quite often is in the form of a gag headline. That is to say, could the Seattle Times really make a credible claim to telling the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth in anything other than a kitschy gag? And as we know, the answer is no. You know, I was being tugged at by Times personnel there to sit down. At least they didn't get medieval on us in terms of having the security do the crackdown, but you can see what I mean, is if they were able to have it any other way, it would have been their forum this evening, and not the forum of Channel 29 or the individual whom they referred to in an item which they can presumably excuse away by referring to it as a gag headline by one of their society columnists. They referred to me, of course, as the Mike Wallace of public access television. This being January 20th and that being December 6th, so only 6 weeks ago, precisely. And that's 6 weeks ago following, you know, 6.5 years of being on the air, doing this sort of thing, and obviously 5.5 years of doing the Cobain case almost exclusively. And finally, they give me the title. The title you won't see on the back of my book jacket anytime soon. The title of the Mike Wallace of Seattle Public Access Television. And why would they shift gears so dramatically and even refer to me thusly in terms of what could be excused as a gag item in the paper? Well, because Norm Stamper resigned on December 6th, and even though the readers of the Times did not find out until the following morning, when they picked up the PI or they heard it on TV, Stamper's ink had dried on the document, and one way or another the word was out. And that, I say, is the reason for this not-so-accidental praise for just a dumb reporter doing his job, you know. It weren't no accident at all. They decided to come clean in case I garnered any national news coverage in the press conference the following day, right? You know, had I been interviewed by, you know, NBC or some other mega entity, they certainly wouldn't want me saying that, well, it's a scandal and a half that I've never been covered by the Seattle press. Why, the Seattle Times has never made anything but a few snipey, disparaging remarks about me. Had I been so bold as to say such a thing on December 7th, the date of the Stanford News Conference, well, of course, I would have come across looking quite foolish, because the Times gave me that high praise, right? The Mike Wallace of public access television. But I'll use that as I may, and won't excuse the Times for not reporting on the uniform scandal. You know how it is that Norm Stamper let the police run wild in the streets without any identifying marks on their uniforms, and how he lied on videotape about it to me, and of course, the Times and its mishandling and misinformation, if not to say actual disinformation on the Kurt Cobain murder story, you know. Never having tied the words Kurt Cobain and murder together in any context until the event of Nick Broomfield's film opening, you know, 4 years after the fact. British filmmaker asks, was Cobain murdered? That was the headline on the interior of the entertainment section piece done by the Times on the Nick Broomfield film opening in April of '98. Again, 4 years after the fact. British filmmaker asks, was Cobain murdered? Yeah, he asked and came up with a very baseless answer. I don't think so, mate. And nobody particularly cared that I had already done 300 hours at the time that Broomfield came up with his hour and a half, so I had him beat by a factor of 200 to 1 in terms of developing a raw weight of material on the Cobain case. And of course, what's all the more important, especially for the capsulizing daily press, is that I came up with all the good stuff. I've come up with all the good stuff since, except of course for that very strange occurrence of Broomfield having gotten the only interview with El Duce on the subject, nicely photographed in high-res 16 millimeter, and of course, as we know, possibly leading to El's death, Eldon Hoke's death, only days later. So, yep, Broomfield got that little piece of footage, and we didn't. And somehow Eldon Hoke got killed by impacting physically with a very large locomotive train, which ran over him near his home in Riverside, California. So, yeah, more good footage. It's not a movie, it's a TV series. And we got some jolly good stuff. That bit with the shotgun shell is obviously classic, you know. Had to be done. I didn't have it. Certainly didn't want to leave that stone unturned in our quest for the truth. Look at the size of that thing next to the human head. You know? As we explained, Antonio Terry died from being shot with one of these. This is a Magnum. This is a .22 Magnum. It's much smaller once it's fired, right? Much smaller. It's a Magnum load. So that little bit at the tip plus a little bit more killed Antonio Terry. He bled to death in Harborview Hospital. first week of June, 1994. Only weeks earlier, about 8 weeks earlier, Kurt Cobain allegedly shot himself with one of these, obviously much, much larger. Obviously would blow your head clean off, right? Compare this to a Magnum 44 slug, which is what Clint Eastwood's character is referring to in that film, which will blow your head clean off. Much larger powder load, much larger weight of shot. 7/8 of an ounce of shot, which does not disperse in the first few inches. In fact, the bolus of shot stays together in the shot cup for about 2.5 feet. And then the petals, which you can see here, the petals at the tip open up on the bolus of shot, and then the pellets begin to separate. They don't begin to separate once they hit soft tissue. Therefore, an explosion from this thing going through the roof of your mouth will blow your head clean off. And yet Antonio Terry, narcotics detective of the Seattle Police Department who was investigating Cobain's death, died by being wounded by one of these. Internal bleeding, cause of death, by being shot in the lower side abdomen, says the death certificate. Kurt Cobain was shot with one of these and did not bleed at all. Except internally, of course. So says the King County Medical Examiner. Poppycock. So Norm Stamper, take a look round and round. Take a look at where you are. It is pretty scary. And of course, obviously, with all due sarcasm, we invite him to enjoy his life alone, without the supportive envelopment of his police department and his highly paid job. Nothing sadder than an old politician, Nobody pays any attention to him at all, except waiters looking for a tip. Yeah. If you haven't been around him, take a look at an old politician, especially one with a bad reputation. It's the saddest thing on earth. But I'll tell you what, we got no apologies. No apologies at all. And I'm Richard Lee, and thanks for joining us. No timesman am I. The time is 9:35. But no timesman am I. It won't never be, neither.